Hallelujah.
Oh, cool, but wait, we're not doing this game yet. Ah, so that's what heaven's like. Like a regular Barracuda, but only more acidic. What's up, everyone? Today I want to talk about Bioshock 2, first released in 2010 for the PC, PS3, and Xbox 360. As usual, we have to ask, what is Bioshock 2? Similar to the original, we are looking at a role-playing FPS, which takes place in a city called Rapture 8 years after the first game, but this time we play as a Big Daddy, which is an awesome concept. The structure of Bioshock 2 is a linear plot that unfortunately doesn't allow us to revisit previous levels. Everything is a one-way trip, which I dislike, as this removes a feature I enjoyed in the original. To the game's credit, it does warn us the first time before we go to leave a level, which is fair. Let's look at the locations of Bioshock 2. We have to ask, are the levels as cohesive as the original? On its own, no. But when you look at Bioshock 2 in combination with the original, I think it builds onto the City of Rapture quite well with one exception. There's the Adonis Spa, which is a Greek-themed resort and therapy center. Next to that we have the Atlantic Express, which is a hub of transit, which wasn't seen in the original, but I like this, as it explains the mass transit system of the city. After that, we have Ryan Amusements, which is a museum and youth propaganda center to make children fear the surface world. This place is actually pretty handy. Alright, I'll stop. Then we have Pauper's Drop, which is a shantytown located under the Atlantic Express storage area. Then there's Siren Alley, which is the red light district of Rapture. After that, we have Dionysus Park, which is a recreational area, which was similar to Fort Frolic, but was rapidly flooded years ago, killing many people. Fontaine Futuristics shows the headquarters of Frank Fontaine's Plasmid business. And lastly, we have Persephone, which is a former prison which functions as the main antagonist's base of operations. As Persephone is located underneath Fontaine Futuristics, I thought the name was interesting. Persephone in Greek culture is the wife of Hades and goddess of springtime, which doesn't make a lot of sense thematically when you look at Bioshock 2. I'd like to think this is a clever theme for the antagonist as a sort of ruler of the underworld. At the same time, I don't think it fits with the Greek deities theme, as Persephone was kidnapped by Hades, and she was the goddess of flowers and vegetation. She would be allowed to visit the surface for 8 months, to allow the growth of crops and harvest, with the return of winter for 4 months. Given the purpose of the prison was to hold people who Andrew Ryan viewed as a threat, it would have made more sense to call this place Hades, as it would have been a better representation of hell. I think this would have aligned better with the original game's themes, as Hephaestus was the workshop of the city and Point Prometheus being the location where Big Daddies and Little Sisters were created. Maybe I'm being a bit picky. Next to world building is the game's sense of immersion. The architecture of each level looks great. There's way more glass and amazing views this time around. The opening of the game also has an awesome view of a decaying Rapture. They also include little tweaks in the game world, like the sound of water coming off our character's helmet, which is a nice touch. The shadow of the main character is also unique for each weapon you have equipped. The game really gave me a sense of higher polish when compared to Bioshock 1. The only problem I noticed was in an area where I had a weird visual error. Floors are optional for some reason.
What the fuck?
The theme of the game taking place in 1968 is mostly absent. There's a little bit of music that helps, but really the game could have taken place any time after the original. Bioshock 2 does a little bit of horror, but I felt it squandered a lot of great potential to scare us, as it mostly focuses on action. The first long dark hallways always seem scary, but once you realize there's no threats, it really loses its edge.
Oh no!
One thing they carried forward from the original game was the revive system using Vita chambers, which had been mysteriously recoded to function for our main character. It's a nice bit of continuity, but we'll have to wait until the plot section to explain. One major departure from the original was the removal of inventing. I guess we won't be able to break the ammo economy near the end of the game this time. Luckily though, we can use cash to buy literally any piece of ammo this time. Another nice thing is we can destroy health stations to obtain free first aid kits with zero regrets, as everything in this game is a one-way trip. Speaking of which, in the original game we could carry 9 first aid kits and 9 vials of Eve. This game only allows 5 of each. I kinda get it. I mean, having 9 is way too overpowered, but it still sucks to be downgraded. Another change in Bioshock 2 is that research is now done using a video camera. We need to cycle through our different abilities and videotape how foes react to damage. With more variety, we score more points, and eventually unlock damage bonuses and extra tonics.
Yes. Okay, show me eyes. Yes. No!
One massive change is they revised the hacking minigame. You now need to trigger a moving needle in certain spaces to succeed. Red triggers alarms, green is the goal, and blue areas grant bonuses like extra items or additional damage depending on the device. In contrast to the original, hacking is real time, which means it can't interrupt a fight, which makes it less handy. Mind you, we are a walking tank, so being tactical is mostly optional. Let's talk about those weapons. This time around, the game allows for dual wielding of a weapon in our right hand and plasmids in our left. The weapons we can use are the drill.
Just the tip!
After that, we have the Rivet Gun, which has standard rivets, heavy rivets for extra damage, and trap rivets.
You triggered my trap card!
Yeah, boy.
After that, we receive a hacking tool, which allows us to hack devices at a distance. It can also automatically hack devices and deploy auto turrets. After that, we have the machine gun, which has regular, anti-personnel, and armor-piercing 50 caliber rounds. I hate that the game lets you grab ammo from the Thompson submachine guns, claiming it's 50 caliber ammo. They're not the same. Then we have the shotgun, which has buckshot, slugs, and phosphorus buck. The slugs will send enemies flying, and the delay of the phosphorus buck before it burns enemies is so satisfying. We also receive a spear gun, which is a mimic of the crossbow with standard spears, rocket spears, and trap spears. The rocket spears are awesome. After they land, they explode after a brief moment for massive damage. Of course, we get a grenade launcher. It's just like the original. Standard grenades, proximity mines, and heat-seeking missiles. It's everything you want. Of course, we get weapon upgrades, just like the original game. The neatest one in the plot is probably the power slide for the drill. It allows us to close in on enemies quickly for a bit of melee damage. The drill upgrades include a reduced consumption rate, damage increase, and a reflector plate to send projectiles back to our enemies. The Rivet Gun receives a damage increase, a magazine increase, and heated rivets to set our targets ablaze. The machine gun's a bit boring. It gets a recoil reduction, a damage increase, and ricocheting bullets. I wanted more.
Disappointed!
The shotgun upgrades include increased capacity, increased damage, and an electric shock bonus, similar to Electric Buck from the original. The spear gun receives a scope, a damage increase, and the final upgrade's the best. It increases both spear velocity and the fire rate. The grenade launcher receives a larger mag, a shield to prevent splash damage, and cluster bombs. That's really about it for the weapons. For plasmids, we have Electro Bolt, which shocks our enemies. When upgraded, it makes me feel like a Sith Lord. Incinerate will burn our enemies. When upgraded, turns our palm into a flamethrower. Telekinesis allows us to throw small objects. Once upgraded, we can throw even bigger items around.
Please put me down.
Hypnotize is like Enrage from the original, as we can make our enemies fight for us. Scout lets us look ahead for enemies, which is kinda useless when you're a walking tank. Insect Swarm is everything you'd expect. The upgraded version of this is my favorite plasmid in the game though, as the swarm does more damage, it'll swarm multiple enemies, and it acts as a trap, as the swarm will inhabit bodies after they die.
The situation has only been made worse with the addition of yet more bees!
After that we have Decoy, which distracts our enemies with a dummy. Once upgraded, it can reflect damage back to them, and it can also heal us. And lastly but not least, we have Cyclone Trap, which will create a small tornado that when triggered will throw our enemies. Similar to Plasmids, Bioshock 2 has gene tonics. However, this time around they've been simplified. The variety of available tonics we can install has been increased from the first game. Increased customization is always welcomed. The one thing I mentioned in my original Bioshock review is that I hate not having the natural camouflage tonic in Bioshock 2. You don't really get it until the last third of the game, and it's not really that useful as you're quite powerful at that point. To top it all off, it takes longer to turn invisible versus the original. Let's transition into the enemies of Bioshock 2, most of which make a return from the original game with a few exceptions. Of course, it wouldn't be Bioshock if we didn't have Splicers. This time we have Thuggish Splicers, Leadhead Splicers, Spider Splicers, which look extra gruesome this time,
I'm a fire in my laser!
Houdini Splicers, which are even more powerful this time, and Brute Splicers, which give the game a bit of British charm. I'm really sad to see Nitro Splicers are removed from the series. By giving grenades to Leadhead Splicers, they're kind of obsolete, but still, rest in peace. And moving on, we have security cameras, turrets, and drones just like the original game. And it wouldn't be Bioshock if we didn't have Big Daddies. The Bouncers and Rosies make a return and are the same as the original game. I really like that both versions received a bit of polish, and they move more naturally. Bioshock 2 also introduces Rumblers, which fire rockets from their shoulder cannons and can deploy miniature turrets. Overall, they offer a nice step up in difficulty from the original Big Daddies. The last Big Daddies we are introduced to are the Alpha series, which are the same as our main character. They're not as tough as the others, but they move quickly and typically deal a high amount of damage as they use the same weapons as us. The ones that we encounter have been driven insane after losing their little sister and failing to succumb to a genetic trigger that should have killed them. Little sisters return as well. The karma system is still present, but this time they include a new atom collection mechanic where we have to defend little sisters while they drain atom from corpses. I like the defensive gameplay, but it feels like they use the idea to stretch out the game a bit. On the other hand, they speed up the collection process in the last third of the game, which was nice. One thing to note, I strongly argue there's nothing more terrifying than dying and panicking that your little sister isn't where you perished. Oh my god! But thankfully she's teleported in front of the Vita chamber you were revived at. A new enemy that's introduced in Bioshock 2, which is also the toughest, is the Big Sisters. These are fully grown little sisters who have aggressive behavior and very powerful abilities. On the other hand, they aren't very common, and normally appear after we deal with all little sisters in each level. They let out a deafening shriek to let us know they're about to appear, and during combat they are very nimble using melee, incinerate, and telekinesis. Probably the neatest thing about fighting them though is that they can drain health from nearby splicers like a vampire. On normal difficulty, they're a fun fight, and on hard, they will rock your world. My reaction to fighting them is always the same. I really like how you can see them stalking us in multiple areas in the game. They give the game a unique feel, but I wish they would have had a second form for a bit more variety, as seeing it 6 times gets a bit stale. That's about it for the enemies. Let's talk about the plot without spoilers. As I mentioned earlier, we play as an Alpha Series Big Daddy named Subject Delta who is trying to recover his little sister. If Delta fails to recover his little sister, his body will shut down due to a genetically engineered trigger to prevent Big Daddies from abandoning their little sisters. We then need to make it from one side of Rapture to the other to find her before we perish. Overall, this plot is different enough to feel unique, but you can't help but feel it doesn't hit as hard as the original, as it never achieves the same level of impact. Don't get me wrong, the game's plot is very appealing, but don't expect to be head over heels. Alright, now we'll jump into spoiler territory. Please jump to the timestamp above to avoid spoilers. Bioshock 2 has 3 supporting characters. The first is Eleanor, who is our little sister we protected in the days before the fall of Andrew Ryan. The second character we need to mention is Sinclair, who is an entrepreneur and our partner who will guide us throughout the game. His motivations involve stealing technology from Rapture and selling them on the surface.
Gotta go fast.
The last supporting character is the main antagonist. Her name is Sophia Lamb, and she is Eleanor's biological mother. She was originally a therapist, and now controls a cult called the Family, and is now in charge of Rapture. As the game opens, we see 3 Splicers trying to kidnap Eleanor. We jump in to save her, only to fall victim to a hypnotized plasmid. We are then introduced to Sophia Lamb, who hands a pistol to Delta and commands that he place it to his temple and pull the trigger. Truly mind-blowing. We awake 10 years later to hear a voice on our radio. It is none other than Tenenbaum from the original game. We move to meet Tenenbaum through the Adonis Spa. As we progress, Eleanor reaches out to us telepathically, requesting we find her before we perish. After finding our first plasmid, we are introduced to a little sister who is abruptly taken by a big sister. We give chase and battle the big sister to only wind up losing when she breaks a nearby window, flooding the entire area.
This is not okay.
We then travel underwater to the Atlantic Express depot and meet Tenenbaum, who introduces us to Sinclair. We also learn Tenenbaum came to the city to rescue little sisters who were being abducted from the surface. From this point forward, Delta and Tenenbaum go separate ways. Speaking with Sinclair, he tells us Eleanor is at Fontaine Futuristics and will need to travel across Rapture to retrieve her. We then make our way to Ryan Amusements, where we locate a sample of Incinerate, meet Sinclair in person, and melt the ice blocking our way to move forward. We then hit 4 more roadblocks on our way to Eleanor. The first is in Popper's Drop, where we need to secure a key from the local governor, Grace, who was Eleanor's foster mother while Lamb was imprisoned by Andrew Ryan. Once we find Grace, we need to make a karma decision to either spare her or murder her as revenge for trying to kill us. Moving on. The second roadblock occurs when the train we are traveling on is torpedoed by Father Wales, who is a devout believer of Dr. Lamb. Unfortunately, we are separated from the train and try to regroup with Sinclair. Sinclair awaits on the train in Dionysus Park, which is slowly running out of air as the area has been flooded. To save Sinclair, we need to drain Dionysus Park using a nearby pumping station in Siren Alley. We get to the pumping station and find it has been repurposed as Father Wales Cathedral. We then murder Father Wales and save Sinclair by draining Dionysus Park before he suffocates. Unfortunately, Sophia Lamb sets a trap and floods Siren's Alley. I really love the underwater sections of this game. It's eerily beautiful. The third roadblock takes place in Dionysus Park, where we have to deal with 3 little sisters as requested by a reporter named Stanley before we can proceed. By the time we deal with the last little sister, we learn Stanley was the one who took over Lamb's cult while she was incarcerated. He abused her followers, and not only that, he was the one who gave up Eleanor to become a little sister. It's also revealed that Stanley was the one who flooded the park, killing many of Lamb's followers to cover up his abuse.
Cocaine's a hell of a drug.
An interesting idea added to the lore at this point is that the reason he wanted us to remove the little sisters was that the atom within the corpses held the memories of the dead, which Stanley knew would give away his crimes. Oh, would you look at that, a second karma choice to either spare or kill this bastard. Rocket Spear. It's super effective. The fourth and last roadblock is at Fontaine Futuristics, where we meet the monster who was once Gil Alexander. Gil Alexander was a scientist who took over for Suchong after he passed away, and actively participated in the creation of Subject Delta, Eleanor, and many other test subjects. We eventually locate Gil, and see he has been transformed into a massive sea monster, created after Lamb tried to turn him into a creature called a Utopian. The goal of the experiment was to make Gil into an archive of everyone's memories by injecting him with a massive amount of Atom. Unfortunately, the experiment failed, and warped his mind, turning him into a husk of his former self. After luring him out into the correct position using Atom-infused plants, we need to take a genetic sample to obtain a key to access Lamb's main base of operations where Eleanor is being held, Persephone. Once we fight our way to Eleanor, Dr. Lamb is found sitting beside her. She reveals Eleanor reprogrammed the city's Vita Chambers using Little Sisters to revive Subject Delta.
I have a pounding headache, my mouth tastes like vomit, and I don't remember a thing!
Dr. Lamb then notes that Delta's body is designed to slip into a coma when Eleanor's heart stops. Dr. Lamb, who is out of options, asks for Eleanor's forgiveness as she smothers her. This breaks Delta's bond with Eleanor and collapses. We later awake strapped to a table to find a little sister sent by Eleanor who is still alive, as Lamb only briefly stopped her heart. The little sister then absorbs Delta and allows us, the player, to take control. This allows us to observe what little sisters see. The contrast of the two worlds is one of my favorite parts of this game, and it really shows why they act so happy. The little sister we control winds up gathering big sister components for Eleanor. Once we turn them over to Eleanor, she will either rescue or harvest the little sister we inhabit by copying how we have acted previously. We are then rescued by Eleanor and make our way to Sinclair's escape pod to finally escape Rapture. We receive a new Plasmid at this point, which allows us to summon Eleanor as a big sister. She can do everything a big sister can do, as well as teleport. Eleanor, I choose you.
Get over here!
Before Delta and Eleanor can escape, we need to track down the key for the escape pod from Sinclair. We locate him in an adjacent wing, now turned into an Alpha Series Big Daddy. He tells us he's been brainwashed and isn't able to control himself any further. Unfortunately, we have to put Sinclair out of his misery, and he thanks us with his final words. Once we return with the key to the escape pod, we witness Lamb destroy 2 ballast pumps, which prevent our escape. In order to accomplish our escape, Eleanor tells us we'll need to evaporate the water in the ballast using the Little Sisters, which are held captive in Persephone. Once again, we will see Eleanor either rescue or harvest the Little Sisters, depending on the example we set forth previously. After we return to the escape pod, Eleanor enters the ballast and begins to evaporate the water. We then do final battle with Lamb's cult, and then flood the room to equalize the pressure to gain access to the escape pod. We then rush to the entrance of the pod, only to see Eleanor barely escape a large bomb located at the entrance to the pod. Delta views Rapture one last time, and turns to witness Dr. Lamb drowning. Now, depending on our choices throughout the game with the Little Sisters, Grace, Stanley, and Gil, we will see Eleanor save or drown her mother, depending on whether we displayed mercy during our journey. After reaching the surface, we witness one of 3 cinematics where Delta is going to die due to the bond being severed between Eleanor and himself. The good ending shows Eleanor absorbing Delta and allowing him to become a part of Eleanor's conscious. We see her to be a compassionate person surrounded by the surviving Little Sisters, declaring Utopia is a people, not a place. The neutral ending shows Delta choosing death and giving Eleanor her freedom to choose the life she desires. The bad ending shows Delta being absorbed into Eleanor by force and foreshadows her villainous intent. Eleanor in this ending is going to do whatever she needs to survive. The 3 ending cinematics and fate of Sophia Lamb mixed together gives the game 6 different endings, which was great. I think it was nice to see the karma system with the Little Sisters tied into the plot more than the original, and we also see how our decisions influence Eleanor. It really makes you think how important it is to set an example for future generations, which is a great theme. Overall, this plot doesn't come anywhere near to the original, which is, to be fair, a very steep hill to climb. For what it is, though, I like the plot of Bioshock 2, but it feels shoehorned in for the sake of producing a sequel. With the exception of Tenenbaum, there's no characters in Bioshock 2 from the original game. If Sophia Lamb or Sinclair or any other characters were in the original, I feel like the game would have been a lot more cohesive to the series as a whole. I also find Sophia Lamb wasn't a very good villain. She doesn't have the same appeals as Andrew Ryan or Frank Fontaine. You get the sense that the conflict between Delta and Dr. Lamb isn't as intense as it could have been. I admire the game for being different, but a strong villain is so important to compare against a great hero. My example would be Batman wouldn't be what it is today if it wasn't for his villains. So, in summary, the gameplay is a step up from the original, and I really enjoy the enhancements the game brought to the table for combat, graphics, and mechanics. The concept of playing as a Big Daddy, the new hacking minigame, and additional enemies were all great. For negatives, the big one for me is I just can't shake the feeling the plot let me down as the original was so good. Bioshock 2 on its own is a pretty good game, which means I'm going to give it an A-, but it just doesn't quite outdo the original. Thank you all for watching. I really appreciate you watching until the end of the video. And lastly, but most importantly, I hope you all have a great day.
Nope.
Well, I wonder what's over in this room.